Knock, knock.
Who's there?
Horror Movie Syllabus.
Horror Movie Syllabus who?
Exactly. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Comedy Movie Syllabus. My name is Professor Victor, and I'll be your host as we go through all of the funny, witty, amusing, and downright hilarious modern comedy movies. If you're new to the channel, your timing's great because this is our first video. And if you're a return watcher who's watched the Horror Movie Syllabus, you're probably thinking to yourself, what the hell is going on? Well, in short, we're rebranding. That's right, as of the date that this video drops, we are no longer the Horror Movie Syllabus, we are the Comedy Movie Syllabus. Why? Well, frankly, we've had enough of the gore and gratuitous nudity, and instead want to talk about movies that are about jokes and gratuitous nudity. So here we are, Comedy Movie Syllabus. Why comedy? Because like the horror genre, which is a bit subjective as to what people find scary, comedy is pretty subjective as to what people find funny. And I am as nitpicky and unpredictable in terms of what I find funny as anybody else. I do know that I tend to find man-child stuff to be not funny. Other things that I don't particularly find funny are kids acting like adults and doing adult things. Doesn't hit for me. Old people acting young and doing young people things. Doesn't hit for me. So there's some things that just categorically don't generally work for me. And then everything else is just kind of hit and miss, and it kind of just depends on my mood, depends on the quality of the comedy, etc. The other thing that I think can be challenging about the comedy genre as a whole is that subjectivity can lead to discussion, but that discussion usually kind of winds up just ending as, you know, I think it's funny or I don't think it's funny. There's not a whole lot of really ways to kind of objectively categorize and qualify or quantify comedy. It kind of either hits for you or it doesn't. But I think that's kind of a fun thing to explore, and I think that that's what we've done at the Horror Movie Syllabus, so why not do it here as well? You know, we can talk about all kinds of different comedy movies. We can talk about silly comedies, parody movies, gross out humor, sex comedies, teen comedies, rom-coms. There's a whole bunch of different comedy subgenres that we can explore. But I figured the one that would be interesting to start with is rewatchable comedy movies. And this is because comedy often has a shelf life. Not every comedy movie is this way. In fact, there's plenty that stand the test of time. But there are a lot of comedy movies that basically feel dated really fast. There's this thing where if you're making kind of contemporary jokes, the jokes won't land 10 years or even 5 years later sometimes. So a lot of comedy has a shelf life. It has an expiration date on it. So what I wanted to do is talk about comedy movies that seem to generally defy this and stand the test of time. Basically, comedy movies that are still funny after you've watched it a dozen times, 24 times or more. They still make you laugh. Now, of course, again, like everything, this is going to be subjective. So what we're talking about are comedy movies that I think have a rewatchability factor. And I note that when people talk about comedy movies and how rewatchable they are, what they're usually talking about are their favorite comedy movies. Because again, comedy movies that aren't rewatchable, they tend to fade away. They don't tend to really retain that rewatchability factor. And the ones that do, the ones that you revisit over and over again, tend to wind up being your favorites. So we're talking about some of my favorite comedy movies today. And we're going to do undergraduate, graduate, and postgraduate level format like we've always done here because I think that works really well. And in this case, they're going to go in escalating order of rewatchability. Basically, how much do I rewatch them? How rewatchable do I find them? So that's the order we're going in today. So sit back, relax. Let's get adjusted into this new format as we take a look at these comedy movies. The first movie that we're talking about today, the undergraduate level selection, is Pitch Perfect. Pitch Perfect came out in 2012 and is admittedly not a movie that is aimed at my demographic in the slightest. I'm really not the audience for it. And yet, as viewers of the Horror Movie Syllabus know, I love this movie. It comes up a lot for some reason in those conversations, and it's just a kind of a, I'd say it's a guilty pleasure of mine, except that I feel not at all guilty about loving it because it's just a really well-made movie that's really funny and that I'll watch over and over again. So that, of course, means it's got to make the list of my rewatchable comedy movies. If you haven't seen it before, the movie is about a college freshman named Becca who starts college and is kind of a loner, kind of a surly girl who doesn't really like to make friends but is really interested in music. And she gets roped into joining an a cappella girls group where she doesn't feel like she necessarily fits in, but it's a group of misfits, anyways, because the group has lost its luster and they want to compete at nationals against the boys a cappella group that is firmly entrenched as champions. Hijinks abound, as they tend to do in comedy movies, of course, and these girls start to bond and become friends, as these things happen to do in comedy movies as well. But I'll stop there so as to not spoil the movie too much for those of you that haven't seen it. But there's probably a lot of you that have seen it because this movie was extremely popular. Possibly one of the biggest reasons for this popularity is the star of the movie, Anna Kendrick, and I can confirm for sure that I saw the movie largely because Anna Kendrick was in it. I'm a fan of hers. She is, she got her start in horror, starring in a series of vampire movies, a very popular vampire series, and then moved over into other movies, dramas, romantic comedies, and comedies like Pitch Perfect, which showed off her singing ability. And that's the thing about this movie that also probably made it pretty popular is the singing. It is basically a musical, but not a musical like the kind I hate, where people basically sing all their dialogue or sing their internal thoughts or something like that. No, this is a movie about singing groups, a cappella singing groups. So they're singing basically, known pop songs and performing various pop songs, usually done in kind of an interesting arrangement, an a cappella arrangement, which actually works quite well for me. I like a cappella music and I like pop music. So usually I don't like musicals, but this is hitting my sweet spot. This is something that works for me rather well. It's more Glee and less Hamilton, if you will. Now, I know for some of you that's actually probably a turnoff because you're probably more into Hamilton. It's well established I don't like musicals, but that's what makes this movie so interesting. It's really aimed at probably teenage, even preteen girls, but that probably suits my sensibilities a lot if you look at a lot of the television I watch. So this is not a movie that's aimed at my demographic, but it still works. And I think that people who gave it a chance, who are, say, my age or just, my demographic, wound up finding it funny and charming anyways, because it is. It's funny and it's charming. Again, it stars Anna Kendrick, who has an innate likability, and it's also got a really good supporting cast led by Australian Rebel Wilson, the underrated scream queen Brittany Snow, the underrated comedy girl Anna Camp, the kind of unknown Skylar Astin, the appropriately rated Adam Devine, and then that guy from that Evan Hansen movie that I really don't get what the big deal is about that guy, but the cast is very solid to good. Pretty much everybody gets an opportunity to shine. Pretty much everybody gets an opportunity to be funny. And the characters, while kind of big and caricature-y, land for you. You connect with them. You enjoy them. They're a pleasant thing to be around. You're rooting for them. You connect with the characters. It's fun. The music is done well. The people can sing. The riff off scene is a pretty well known thing. Anna Kendrick doing her cups thing was so popular that they made a music video out of it. So the music part of this really connected with people too. It really worked well, and it's easy to see why. It's infectious. It's fun. I enjoy it, and it's a kind of movie that every time it's on TV, I have to stop and watch it. Like if it's just on there, I will stop and watch it because it's a feel good movie. It's easy to jump into at any point in time. It's not terribly deep or difficult to follow. It's just a good time. I'm clearly not the only person who feels this way because the movie was a huge commercial and critical success. It got really good reviews and people really loved it, enough so that they made 2 sequels to it. And interestingly enough, the sequels were directed by Elizabeth Banks, who was one of the stars of the movie, and she's a scene stealer in the movie. She's very, very funny. And she went on to direct, I think this might have been her first directorial debut, was Pitch Perfect 2, which is pretty good. It adds Haley Steinfeld to the cast. It's got a guest spot by Pentatonics. It's a lot of fun. Not as good as the first movie, but still pretty solid. Pitch Perfect 3, not so much, and perhaps the less said about that, the better. I did watch it. It's not great. They kind of focused on Rebel Wilson's character more, which was probably a mistake. It's not great. And then I guess they've done a spin-off TV show following Adam Devine's character, which is probably the least interesting person they could have chose to base a show around. It's I've watched a couple episodes of it, and it's not great. It's a little bit of a slog, but it's good enough to have on in the background, I guess. Suffice to say, I really love the first movie, and I love the world that they've set up. But honestly, I can't see them doing more. I can't see them making a Pitch Perfect 4. But if they do, I would watch it. I'm assuming a lot of you have seen this movie and have opinions on it. And if you do, please leave them in the comments below. And if by some chance you haven't seen this movie, I would definitely recommend it. Like I said, it's a feel-good time. It's pretty inoffensive. It's only the slightest bit edgy, and it's just fun. It's got good performances, good music, and it's a good time. And I could watch it over and over and over again. And so if you haven't seen it, you should at least watch it once. The second movie that we're talking about today is Coming to America. Coming to America came out in 1988 when star Eddie Murphy was at the height of his popularity and powers. He was probably the biggest star in the world at that point, and he really couldn't do anything wrong, and he was hilarious. He was edgy and funny and just doing all kinds of things that we just really hadn't seen before at the time. And while he would go on later to kind of get into more family friendly fare and arguably less innovative and less funny stuff, I do believe that this moment in his career is a pinnacle, and this movie is one of the crown jewels of his entire career. If you haven't seen it before, the movie stars Eddie as Prince Akeem of Zamunda, an African country that is very wealthy, and he's set to marry a bride on a prearranged marriage, but he would rather marry for true love. So he decides to go with his friend and servant, Semi, played by Arsenio Hall, to Queens, New York, in order to find his new queen. And of course, as he goes to New York and has a fish out of water experience, hijinks abound, as they always do. But we'll stop there so as to not spoil the movie for you. But if you haven't seen this movie, I would highly recommend seeing this movie because it's absolutely hysterical. Like I said, it's Eddie Murphy kind of at his best. It really is him doing everything that Eddie Murphy is known for doing in the best possible way. And I mean that not just from his 80s heyday, but also from where his career would go later on, where he'd be known more for dressing up in various disguises and playing various different characters, which I feel like he did basically to death in a lot of his movies like Nutty Professor and stuff like that, which I didn't care for. But this is the movie where he does it first, where he starts playing multiple characters and Arsenio Hall also playing multiple characters, and it's hysterical. It's absolutely hilarious, and at the time we hadn't seen people really doing this before, and so at least not well enough that I can remember. And so it really lands, it really hits. Where some of them you could tell was obviously him, but some of them he really did a great job of disguising himself, and you did not pick up that it was him. And in particular the guys in the barbershop, absolutely fantastic, and Eddie Murphy's playing a couple of them. It's a wonderful, wonderful scene, and it's a wonderful, wonderful demonstration of Eddie's talent. The movie is directed by John Landis, who has done a few noteworthy stuff. An American Werewolf in London, of course, being one of them. But he's not really known for this movie as much, and I think it's because this movie is really Eddie's movie. And in fact, I think that there was some friction between director and star because Eddie was pretty big at this point, kind of calling the shots and doing what he wants. Not the least of which is having his friend Arsenio Hall play a sidekick. But that's a great decision because the chemistry between them is fantastic, and it drives most of the movie. There's a lot of other people that are noteworthy in the movie as well, including James Earl Jones playing Eddie's father, and there's some brief moments from Sam Jackson and Louis Anderson. There is some really great cameos in here. I won't spoil all of them for you, but it's really a wonderful kind of ensemble comedy, but it's also Eddie Murphy. It's really shining a light on Eddie Murphy. And in fact, sometimes Eddie Murphy's ensemble is Eddie Murphy playing other characters. And it works really, really well. The role playing stuff, unfortunately, kind of got beaten to death later on, but it really is a highlight of the movie here. And again, it's just highlighting how good Eddie was. He was at the top of his game there. He honestly, I don't think he's ever been funnier than he is in this movie. And it's a fish out of water story. it runs the risk of feeling dated when you have like this fish out of water story with an African prince in New York. But I don't think it ever crosses into the realm of, you know, kind of being offensive or politically incorrect to a degree that is cringeworthy at this point in time. For the most part, I feel like the movie's making fun of stuff in a very lighthearted way that's not going to make you bristle, even though it's over 30 years old. It really is, you know, not inoffensive, but not so offensive that you're just like, oh, I can't watch this anymore. I feel like it's aged fairly well in that regard. It's, the jokes they're making are pretty inoffensive and charming, as opposed to being, too racial or too, edgy or, I feel like it's a fairly safe comedy. But then again, I grew up in this era, so maybe my perspective is not the best one to take on that. But they did go ahead and make a legacy sequel recently. Now, years later, they're making this legacy sequel where it's all about Prince Hakim's son, and it's okay. It's not bad. I think it premiered on Netflix or one of the streaming services, and it's funny. It's fine. It's worth watching, but it's nowhere near as funny to me as the original one. And I don't think that that's because of anything like about like jokes feeling dated or jokes feeling improper or anything like that. In fact, I'm kind of bringing it up for that point that they're making a lot of the same kinds of jokes. So I don't think that the jokes have aged poorly in that regard. They're just a little stale, maybe, because those jokes have already been made in 1988 and they were funnier then. But the original movie does work for me very well. I've watched it so many times that I probably have all the lines still memorized. I remember in high school, my friend and I would trade lines back and forth from the movie all day long, to the point where we were getting to really obscure lines that we barely could even remember what they were, what context they were used in, because that's how much we knew that movie. We'd watch it over and over and over again, and I can still watch it over and over again. I can never get tired of that movie. I still laugh at it. I still find things funny in it. It just works for me, and I'm guessing a lot of people probably think it works for them too. But there might be people that don't. Like I said, some people might think that it hasn't aged as well as I think it's aged, and if so, I'd love to hear your comments about that below, because I'd like to get that fresh perspective. But I think it holds up well. I think it's a good time, and if you haven't seen it, I would recommend checking it out. And the last movie that we're talking about today, the postgraduate level selection, is Heathers. Heathers came out in 1989 and is not just one of my favorite comedies of all time, it's one of my favorite movies of all time. It's just, there's really not a lot that I've ever seen that's like it. And at the time, it was pretty edgy, but it feels even more edgy by today's standards, which is something about an interesting dichotomy that you don't usually see with an old comedy movie that's, 30 plus years old. It's really kind of an interesting phenomenon that this movie feels just as relevant and yet kind of also impossible to do in this time period now. But we're gonna get into that in just a minute. If you haven't seen it, the movie stars Winona Ryder as a girl named Veronica, whose best friends are all named Heather, and they are the most powerful clique in high school. They are basically mean girls who are very rude to people, pick on people, and basically kind of control the school. But she's not really into that anymore. She's really not loving that anymore. Enter Christian Slater's character JD, who is this edgy, angsty, trench coat wearing, mysterious guy who offers her a potential chance to get out of this clique and maybe get rid of the Heathers for good, whatever that means. And I'll stop right there so as not spoil the movie for you, but this movie is going to go into places that you just don't see coming in. We're going to kind of, I guess, spoil a little bit of it because we're going to talk about some of that because you kind of have to. And because, well, frankly, you kind of need to know that. Heathers is the movie that I would say, the movie that we're talking about today, that I would say maybe we want to put a trigger warning in there for people because suicide is a prevalent theme in the movie. The movie goes into a kind of a murder spree where they stage the murders to look like suicides. And this is a comedy, admittedly, a black comedy. It doesn't sound like it'd be funny because by today's standards, we take this stuff very, very seriously. But I assure you, it's very, very funny. The movie is satirical and edgy. It really is making a commentary on not just the vapidness of teenagers and the kind of the follow culture, but also just the vapidness of suburban families and upper middle class families in general. and how out of touch everybody really is, and how everything can become trendy, even suicide. It really is an interesting commentary that, again, pretty relevant even today, but also would make people very uncomfortable today to make a movie like this. This movie basically is kind of making jokes out of suicide, and for some people that's not going to roll. And if you're one of those people, maybe don't watch this movie. It may not be for everybody, but I find it absolutely hilarious and absolutely wonderful. I love everybody in the movie. Winona Ryder, who was one of my favorite actresses and was like the it girl at the time, basically kind of breaking out here in this movie. Christian Slater, who was a heartthrob in the 80s, is doing a great Jack Nicholson impression here that I absolutely love. You've got a pre 90210 Shannon Doherty here, pre Charmed. Kim Walker playing the lead Heather is fantastic. R.I.P. But the actors are all great because it's kind of hyper real. The whole movie is hyper real and also and kind of surreal, and everybody's playing things kind of big, and it completely works. It's weird. It's zany. It's absolutely ludicrous and hysterical, and has some incredibly wonderfully memorable performances and moments. I Love My Dead Gay Son is still one of the funniest things that you'll probably ever hear in a movie. It works, and it works in part because it's going places that you just wouldn't see going. I mentioned the suicide stuff, but there's other stuff in this movie that is just wildly taboo to even make movies about at all right now, but especially a comedy. And I don't want to spoil it for anybody, but if you've seen the movie and you know how it's supposed to end and everything, you know exactly what I'm talking about. The movie is a special one for me because I remember exactly where I was when I saw it. I was in St. George, Utah, in a hotel room with my family. We were on a vacation, a family vacation. I'm watching cable there because they had cable, and this movie came on, and I didn't even really know anything about it, but I knew Winona Ryder, so I wanted to watch it, and I was blown away. I thought it was amazing, and I still do to this day. My friends and I in high school used to watch this movie a lot because I had a bunch of friends named Heather. And so we would all watch this together, and every Heather would pick a different role. And then my one friend Danielle used to play Veronica. I got to play JD, so I still probably know every line by JD. We would just sit there and do all the lines. Super obnoxious for anybody who hadn't seen the movie before. But that's what I'm talking about. Rewatchability. I can rewatch this movie over and over again. I can quote all the lines. I probably can still quote all the lines, even though it's been a little while since I've seen it. But I never get tired of this movie. And it does have its cult following, and it really had a bit of an impact. Even though maybe it's not the most mainstream and well-known movie in the world, a lot of people do seem to be familiar with it, and it is responsible for, I guess, imitators, or what I like to call just like a natural progression. The movie Jawbreaker that came out after this is very much has Heather's envy, and that's an okay movie. But the one that really lands is Mean Girls. Mean Girls is a very well-known, popular movie, very mainstream, that owes a massive debt of gratitude to Heather's. And I don't think it's trying to copy Heather's. I think it's, again, the natural progression, the natural evolution of this kind of movie. And it's an absolutely hysterical movie that just missed making it onto the syllabus, frankly. And I figured I could probably talk about it here because I love Mean Girls. I think it's hysterical. I could go on and on about that. There's another one I could rewatch over and over and over again. But because of its similarity to Heather's, and because I was not going to not talk about Heather's, I figured I'd just mention Mean Girls here because it's brilliant. But Heather's is kind of the trailblazer for movies like that, and it does it really, really well. Like I said, may not be for everybody because these topics are much more touchy now, and that is evidenced by the fact that they did a TV remake of the movie, a show called Heather's, where they tried to kind of flip it a little bit. I guess people maybe use the word woke on this, where instead of the popular cisgendered white kids being terrorized and murdered, it's a bunch of minorities and LGBTQ positive people that are being the victims there because they are the bullies in this version, which seems like an interesting idea. It's an interesting idea because it uses the social media aspect as the bullying, and it's a fresh take on this concept, modern take on it. And on paper, that sounds really good, but then when you shake it out, what you've got are these cisgendered, heterosexual white kids murdering the minorities, and nobody thought this out and thought that that was maybe a bad idea. So the TV show did not really land well, and in fact, I think it's kind of hard to find it now. I have seen it. I watched almost all of it. I don't think I got to see the last episode, but it's hard to find, and it's not good. It's not good. When it's trying to copy the movie, it's kind of eye rolling, and when it's trying to do its own thing, it's not really landing very well. Cool idea that just didn't really work out. And then I guess there's also Heather's musical. I tried to watch this. I did. As much as I hate musicals, like I mentioned, I tried. I couldn't get more than like 3 minutes into it. It's just awful. It's awful, guys. I know if you like musicals, maybe you love it, but good lord, man, Heather shouldn't be a musical. Like, what can I say? And I know I'm a bias. I know I'm biased. I don't care. Um, but the movie itself is a treasure. It's a gem. I love it, and I would highly recommend it to everybody. But with the caveat of consider what the subject matter is about and whether or not you're just too sensitive for that. If you can't laugh at that stuff, if you just feel like it's never going to be funny to you, don't watch it. It's really okay. It's not like it's a must see thing, but for me, it's must see. I love it. I own it on multiple formats and multiple copies. I'm obsessed with the movie. It is one of my favorites, so that's my endorsement of it. So that's going to do it for my exploration into rewatchable comedy movies. But as usual, I like to have a few extra credit movies to offer up to you. And in this case, I had several to choose from. So I narrowed it down to just three. So let's get into those right now. The first extra credit movie I'm going to mention is Major League. Major League came out in 1989 and is a baseball comedy movie and is, in my opinion, the best baseball movie of all time ever. Not even a drama, straight up comedy, and it is one of my favorite comedy movies. Now, it's worth noting that I'm a big baseball fan, so I'm a little bit biased, but still, this movie's really, really funny. If you've never seen it, the movie follows professional baseball team, the Cleveland Indians, which at the time were not a very good baseball team, and honestly now not even that great of a baseball team, but they were historically bad at the time. And it's the idea of a bunch of misfit players put together by an owner that wants to basically move the team so she can make more money and live in Florida. And the team, of course, comes together to try to win the whole thing so that they can foil the plans of their evil owner and basically make some friends along the way. And hijinks abound as they always do. But the movie is funny for a couple of reasons, not the least of which is it's very much similar to the plot of the show Ted Lasso. If you've watched that show before, the concept of it is very similar. Now, they go off in very different directions, but the basic premise is essentially the same. And the movie Major League really works for me because it's really leaning in hard to the comedy about baseball. If you are a baseball fan, you're going to find Major League funny. It really nails baseball comedy very, very well. If you're not a baseball fan, it may not have as much to offer for you. It does have some romance in there. There is a rom-com aspect to it with a heavy baseball backdrop that works rather well. But really, it's the baseball comedy that's front and center and is the backbone of the movie. The other strength of the movie is a really, really good cast, led by pre-insanity Charlie Sheen, a pre-tax problems Wesley Snipes, a pre-24 Dennis Haysbert, a pre-inconsequentialness Tom Berenger, Rene Russo, who's just always great. There's just a really solid cast, and everybody's bringing their A games here. They're all really funny. They all get really good moments. And again, like in many comedy movies, a lot of them are just kind of caricatures rather than characters, but they work. They're memorable, they're likable, they're funny, they're noteworthy. They really do sell it. They really do land the jokes, and everybody is just kind of vivid and pops. And it's just a feel good movie, like all sports movies tend to be, but with a lot of straight up comedy in there that just works really well for baseball fans and just anybody who likes sports probably would get into this. If you don't like sports, again, I'm not sure if it would land for you, but it landed for enough people that they did make a couple sequels. They're not great. I would skip the sequels if I were you, but I'd watch the original. And if you aren't a baseball fan or a sports fan and you haven't seen it, watch it and let me know what you think. I would love to know what your opinion is of this movie if you don't like sports. Is it still funny to you or is it a slog? Because I love it. It's one of my favorites, but I love baseball. So I would love to hear from a non-baseball fan what you think of Major League in the comments below. The next extra credit movie I'm going to mention is Clerks. And Clerks came out in 1994 and is written and directed by Kevin Smith, who's pretty well known as a filmmaker these days, but this was his big debut, and it was a pretty big splash. It's an indie movie from an indie director. It really made a big impact and really kind of was one of the leading indie movies to really kind of make people realize this is a viable way of making a movie and can lead to mainstream success. But if you haven't seen it before, the movie is a low budget black and white affair of a couple guys, one who works as a clerk in a convenience store, the other one that works as a clerk in a video store, and they're buddies. And it's basically just a day in their life, hanging out, doing their job, kind of dealing with some personal issues with girlfriends and whatnot, but really just kind of the mundane daily life of store clerks and the kind of the ludicrous things that kind of happen from day to day in their daily work lives. Now, I won't go into detail so as not spoil things too much, but the movie, like I said, it hit really well. And I think part of the appeal of it is that a lot of people who have worked these kind of jobs, convenience store jobs or retail type jobs, or anything where you're dealing with customer service pretty much in any way, shape, or form, this movie probably hits for you because you've experienced stuff like this. You've experienced essentially annoying customers, which is a big theme of the movie, is that customers are annoying. This really hits. The other aspect of it that I think works for people or connects with people is it is a little bit of a coming of age movie. It's about, a guy who's basically, he's out of college, he's really not doing much with his life, and he's just working this dead end job, and he really has to make the decision to do something more. Take the reins and do something more, noteworthy with his life and move forward rather than just kind of staying stuck in his rut in his daily life. And I think that does resonate for people. But I think why it got so much attention was Kevin Smith doing it himself. He famously sold his comic book collection and made like 28 grand to make this movie, which is peanuts, of course. And it was a huge, huge hit, distributed by Miramax, and became a big, big hit, and put him on the map. And it really showed people that these kind of movies can be successful and that you can basically do it yourself. Now, Kevin Smith is a better writer than he is a director. He has really his real strength is in dialogue. The dialogue in this movie is sharp. It's funny. It feels real and authentic, like the way people actually talk, and it really lands really well. As a director, he is at best serviceable. The movie is not directed great, and he gets a little bit better as his career goes on, but he never really shines as a director. He's no auteur, but he's a solid scriptwriter. He really is funny, and these kind of movies landed for me at the time. And what's interesting is, as I've gotten older, my tastes have changed a little bit, and Kevin Smith's type of humor isn't quite as funny to me as it used to be. A lot of the other movies that he's made, they're fine, and I have more of a nostalgia for them, but they don't necessarily land as much. The jokes got tired. He went back to the well maybe one too many times for his Askew universe, his View Askew universe, is his production company called View Askew, and he calls this his Askew universe because all the movies are kind of interconnected, and they're fine, they're fun, but this movie is to me the rewatchable one. This is the one that doesn't feel like it gets old. I still think it's really funny. I still think the jokes land, even though they're juvenile and crass. They still work for me. Is that nostalgia? Maybe, but I do think that this movie still lands for even people today. I've seen people do like reaction videos to it and laugh at it. It does seem to hit because, again, the script is funny and it has enough relatable points to it. It hasn't gone into the absurdity that his later movies will get into. And it's not even his best movie. His best movie is probably Chasing Amy, but this movie is probably his most rewatchable movie. And it's a shame that as a filmmaker, he hasn't really grown that much. Now, I've watched some of his later movies and he has grown a little bit. The themes are a little bit more mature, but the jokes are kind of the same, and so they're a little bit stale. I know that he just did the third Clerks movie. He did a sequel to Clerks, Clerks 2, which is fine. And I haven't seen Clerks 3. I haven't heard anything particularly good about it, and I haven't been that excited to watch it, frankly, because, again, I feel like it's going to the well a little too much. He should be moving on and doing something different because he does have some talent, and I think I'd like to see his skills applied in a different place. We talked about Tusk before. We talked about Red State before, when I was doing the horror movie syllabus. And so it's worth noting that he does have the ability to do other things. So I'd like to see that, but I can still rewatch Clerks over and over again. I'm guessing a lot of you have seen it before, so if you have, let me know what you think of it. But for those of you that haven't, and there's probably a lot of you that haven't, definitely worth it checking out. Again, it's got some crass humor in it. It's very much boys humor, so there's that. But I think it's a lot of fun. I do think it holds up really, really well. And I think it's remarkable what he was able to do with so little money, even though he's basically got his friends acting in there and it shows they're not great. The dialogue is funny enough, the story's funny enough that it kind of masks all of the rough edges that the movie has. So definitely worth checking out. And the last extra credit movie I'm going to talk about is Office Space. Office Space came out in 1999 and is written and directed by Mike Judge, who is the creator of Beavis and Butthead. And this movie very different than Beavis and Butthead, and it really is kind of a memeable type movie. It's the kind of movie that has so many moments in it that really resonate and click for people that it really kind of becomes like a series of memes that you've probably seen before, even if you haven't seen the movie. And if you haven't seen the movie, the story is about a guy who works at a software company, kind of a dead end, mind numbing job, and he's really dissatisfied with it. And then one day he is being hypnotized by a guy to feel a little bit happier. And the hypnotist dies and leaving him in a perpetual state of bliss. So his job no longer bothers him and he stops caring about it and just starts acting out and doing really hilarious things. Meanwhile, he's trying to romance a girl who works at the nearby restaurant, and he's trying to help his friends keep their jobs or at least not go broke. But I won't get into it any farther than that because I don't want to spoil the plot points for you. But Office Space is a classic. It's really hilarious, and it almost made the syllabus proper, frankly, because it's just that funny. If you've worked in an office at all, this movie's going to hit for you. And a lot of us have. Even if you haven't worked in an office before, you know enough about how offices work for this movie to still be funny. But I definitely feel like if you worked in an office, it hits a special place in your heart because the mundane stupidity of things that are done in the office, the things about technology not working right, the annoying people in the office when you're sharing a space with them, and all the weird characters that you deal with, the bosses and how out of touch they are. All of this stuff is going to click for you if you worked in an office because it's all being satirized here in wonderful fashion. All of the actors in the movie are good. The lead is Ron Livingston, and this is what I always know him from. Every time I see him in anything else, Conjuring, whatever, this is the movie that I think of. Jennifer Aniston as the flare-wearing love interest is probably doing her best work ever in this movie. She is absolutely hysterical here. I liked Friends. I like Jennifer Aniston, but I don't think she's ever been funnier than she is in this movie. And I think it's because the script is sharp, the jokes are hilarious, and it really does work for me. It's got this wonderful ability to do incongruous pairings, like the music that doesn't really match the scene that really makes for a lot of hilarious moments, a lot of side characters who get wonderful moments to shine, and again, these moments that really stand out as like memeable moments, just things that really are memorable, scenes that are memorable, characters that are memorable, concepts that are memorable, that just make this movie a real big hit. I often wonder if this movie feels dated now. Like, do people watching it now feel like it's dated because the technology in particular is so dated? But I don't think so, because even though the technology is kind of quaint and charming, floppy disks and fax machines and stuff like that, I think people still understand what those things are, and I think that the general concept of the work office space still remains. Even post pandemic, where people are mostly working at home, I think this still permeates our understanding. People still know what offices are like. The Office, the TV show, is still a very popular show. And even though it's been off the air for a while now, it's so people are familiar with this office environment, this office setting. It's still a thing that everybody knows and everybody finds funny when lampooned the right way, like The Office or Office Space has done. This is one that definitely hits for me very, very well. I've worked in Office Space for a long, long time. So this really resonates for me. Some of the moments in this movie are moments I have had. I have never taken a baseball bat to a piece of equipment, but I've thought about it. So this movie really hits for me, and it hits for a lot of people. It's definitely a cult favorite. It's never had any sequels, and I hope they never do because it's just perfect the way it is. Don't mess with it, leave it be. But if you haven't seen it, definitely check it out because I do think it has universal appeal, even if you never worked in an office space before. I do think this will hit for you. It hits for so many people, and it's definitely, definitely worth your time. So that's going to do it for our exploration into comedy movies. The comedy movie syllabus is up and running. Like I said, as of the date of this video being released, this is the new format. We are doing this horror be damned. We're not doing horror anymore. It's just this as of the date that this video came out. But now it's time to look at a comedy trivia pursuit card. This is a variation on what we used to like to do in the horror movie syllabus, where we look at a particular card and read it on camera to see if we can answer it. And we're going to do a comedy question today. And the question is, which comedian / actor makes the worst movies? That feels like a very subjective question, not a really objective question. And I've got tons of things I could answer. I have a lot of people I could think of that just make movies that I think are absolutely terrible. And it's not even an opinion thing. It's saying which person makes the objectively worst movies. And, there's a lot of ways I can go with this. But since I don't think you have to answer, you have to think too hard for an answer. I think you just kind of like, make your own guess on this. I'm not going to spend a lot of time spinning our wheels on this one. I'm just going to go ahead and offer my answer. And my answer is going to be Will Ferrell. Will Ferrell's somebody that I thought was really funny on Saturday Night Live, but I do not like his movies by and large. I really don't like his movies. And again, personal bias possibly because I don't like man-child movies, and that's largely what he's known for doing. So, yeah, I'm going to go with Will Ferrell. That's going to be my answer. And the card says, no, it says Adam Sandler. Adam Sandler makes the worst comedy movies. And honestly, I can't argue with that either because he also does Man-Child, and that's his bag. And it's not my bag at all. And in case you hadn't noticed, it's actually a fake question. I don't have a comedy horror movie. I don't have a comedy cards. I have all the horror trivia pursuit cards. I don't have comedy cards at all. So I'm just making up a question because this is all kind of silly. And for those of you that have been discombobulated but stuck through this entire video, good on you. Next week, we will be doing something not so different from our usual videos. But until then, class dismissed.